Today we're going to be talking about participles in Latin. This is a class project for our Honors Latin 3-4 class, and we've created a PowerPoint, and I will also be explaining this along the way. So this has been presented by Kirsten Anders, Tracy Chung, Taylor Johnson, Stephanie Miller, and Nisha Valu. I'm Tracy Chung. I'll be the one talking throughout this entire thing. So here we go. So first we're going to talk about what participles are. Participles are basically just verbs that have been adjusted to look like adjectives, and so then they're used like adjectives in normal Latin sentences. These are somewhat verbs and somewhat adjectives, but they're mostly adjective-like. They all have tenses. They can be perfect active, perfect passive, present active, future perfect, or future active. And they all have these tenses that belong with what tense they actually are in. So it doesn't make sense for something that you mean for to be in the future to be in perfect. It has to line up with what you mean. So participles come from two different parts of the dictionary form of a verb. Two of the forms come from the infinitive form of the verb, which is also the second participle part, and two of the forms come from the fourth principal part, which usually ends in us. The first type of participle we're going to talk about is the present active. The present active is formed from the infinitive, which is the second participle part. You take off the re ending and add the ns, and because this is now a third declension adjective, the genitive form of this participle would end in ntis. And also for the third io and the fourth conjugation, you add the I before the E as you would normal noun or normal adjectives. They're translated as verbing, so for example, amare would become amans, amantis, which means loving, and audire, which is a fourth conjugation, will become audiens, audientis, meaning hearing. The future passive is also formed from the second participle part, also known as the infinitive, except this time you take off the re ending and add the ndis ending. This ndis makes it a regular us, a, adjective, which can be whatever gender it needs to be to line up with the noun it's with. The third io and the fourth have the same I rule, and the future passive can also be formed just directly from the previous participle we learned by just adding the nd where it's appropriate before the us ending. So, for example, amare becomes amandus aum, which means about to be loved, and audire becomes audiendus aum, about to hear. The perfect passive is the first one to be formed from the fourth principal part. Then the perfect passive is just the fourth principal part as it is. The fourth principal part usually ends in us, and now it just as is, it becomes us, aum. These are translated as having been verbed. So for example, amare is now amatus aum, and audire becomes auditus aum, meaning having been loved and having been heard respectfully. The future active is also part of being formed from the fourth principal part. Usually it adds the ur before the us aum, or you could just think of it as taking off the us and forming urus. They translate to be about to verb. So for example, amare becomes amaturus aum, and audire becomes auditurus aum, meaning about to love and about to hear. To decline these adjectives, you just have to make sure it agrees in gender, number, and case with the noun or pronoun that it goes with. The future passive, perfect passive, and future active are all us, aum adjectives, which means that they decline like any other noun that ends in us or a or The present active declines as a third declension adjective because it ends in ns and ntis, and they can be any gender respectfully. These are the endings for adjectives that would end in us. The endings go in order from nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative. The first column is the singular and the second column is the plural. So in order from top to bottom and then on to plural, it goes us, e, o, o, e, orum, is, os, is. These are the endings for adjectives that end in a. usually feminine, and the order is still the same, and it reads I, I, arum, is, as, is. These are the endings for adjectives, which are normally neuter, and the format is still the same, e, o, o, a, orum, is, a, is. The thing to remember with neuters is that the nominative and the accusative, for depending on the number, they'll be the same. And so as you see, is the ending for both nominative and accusative in singular, and a is the ending for both nominative and accusative in the plural. So for the ns and tis adjectives, or the participles, these will be third declension, and third declension normally is blank, is, ema, s, ibis, s, ibis, and I've just adapted this same third declension declining chart into the ns and tis, so it becomes ns, ntis, nti, ntem, nte, ntes, ntum, ntibis, ntes, ntibis. There are also these things called deponent verbs. Deponent verbs are just special verbs that they may look passive, but they're still translated as active verbs. Because they have different principal parts and their dictionary form looks different, the participles can be formed a little differently as well. The present active and future passive are formed similar to regular verbs, except because the infinitive ends in ri, the ri is removed instead of the re. And then the third principal part of deponent verbs are normally something ending in us, and then sum, which is the I form of to be. Usually we just use this word that ends in us as the fourth principal part and are formed the same way as normal verbs. So for example, the verb conor, conari, conatus sum would become, in the perfect active, conans, conantis, meaning trying. In the perfect passive, conatus aum, having tried. In the future active, conaturus aum, about to try. And in the future passive, conandus aum, to be tried. To identify these participles in text, you just have to look for a few certain cues that will tell you whether or not these are participles. For present actives, usually it's just the ns or the nt that is very obvious that it could be a present active participle. You just have to be careful that those ending in ns are not nouns, because sometimes words like adolescens end in ns, but adolescens is a noun and not a participle. The perfect passive will look just like a fourth principal part, so you kind of have to just know what the verbs are, and when you see a verb with a kind of noun ending, you kind of have to think like, oh, this could be a participle. For future active, look for the or in the word, because all future actives have that or, and it's something that may stick out to you when reading. And for the future passive, just look for the nd, which is kind of the same deal as future active, but using a different cue. There are also things called the ablative absolute, and these ablative absolutes are just phrases that include a participle and a noun that are both in the ablative case. And normally these are translated like, they're translated as with the noun, and then the participle in the correct tense. So usually ablatives are used for prepositions, and sometimes they're used without prepositions with an implied preposition. You can just kind of think of it as, in ablative absolutes, with is the implied preposition. So, for example, his verbis dictis Kaiser discedit would be translated into, with these words having been said, Caesar left. The ablative absolute in the sentence would probably be his verbis dictis, and as you can see, all of those words are in the ablative. His and verbis go together. His is just modifying verbis, it's just telling him which words were said. His is just meaning these or this, and then dictis is the participle, and because dictis is a form of the perfect passive, the translation becomes having been said. So with these words having been said would be the translation of the whole ablative absolute in this sentence. So, now that we've gone through this entire PowerPoint, you are now a master of the participles in Latin. Apparently, someone also wanted to congratulate you on your face, which is probably a nice gesture, seeing as tomorrow is Valentine's Day. I hope you enjoy this PowerPoint, and I hope you know a lot more about participles now. Thanks again for watching, and I guess if we ever make another screencast, we'll see you later.